The Grand Healer's Court glistened under the perpetual twilight of Calyx 9's twin suns, casting the hallways in a ceaseless wash of warm, violet light. Walls were veined with traces of crystalline ore that flickered like a heartbeat, tracing the lifeblood of the planet itself. Here, only the galaxy's most esteemed healers were permitted entrance, and their word was law across sectors. Among them stood the doctors of the Eryth Council, an ancient assembly of Calyxian elites whose soft blue skin shimmered beneath long robes encrusted with polished stones from moons and distant stars. Their knowledge of medicine had propelled them to near mythical status. Yet today, the council chamber was a tense, huddled mass of murmurs and glances, the air heavy with scents of native flora, meant to soothe. They needed comfort, for an unthinkable decision was imminent. At the center of the chamber lay a sealed cryopod, slightly scuffed and very out of place among the Calyxians' pristine devices. Inside was a Calyxian child, Kael'tar, one of the youngest members of a powerful house, afflicted by a sickness known across galaxies as the Crimson Veil, a wasting disease that consumed its host from the inside out, leaving only frail, translucent skin stretched over weakened bones. The Eryth Council's finest had tried to halt the spread of the veil. Their most advanced treatments had all failed. The child had been given days to live, maybe less. Desperation, it seemed, had driven them to accept a proposal that none of them could have fathomed on their own. A door at the far end of the chamber opened, and the low rumble of voices quieted. A human walked in. She wore no ceremonial garb, no polished stones or insignia of expertise, just a simple uniform marked with the red and white insignia of the Galactic Rescue Corps. Her short hair and firm gaze were a stark contrast to the sweeping robes and soft, contemplative features of the council members. Dr. Lena Carter was an unassuming presence, yet she radiated an energy that was at once humble and resolute. She carried a rugged medical kit in one hand, the edges worn and scuffed. Lena looked around the room, her gaze briefly resting on each alien before her, who, despite their anxiety, couldn't help but stare back at her with subtle derision. So Lena said, her voice even, "You asked for a healer." A particularly gaunt Calyxian with silvery eyes and glistening skin, identified by the golden embroidery on his robe as the council's head, stepped forward. "We asked for a medic, not a human." One of the council members shot him a cautionary glance, but Lena only smiled slightly. "I understand," she said, her voice calm. "You must be Dor VA, chief healer of the Eryth Council." He inclined his head stiffly. "You are correct, Dr. Carter. Your presence here was not our first choice. It is our last. And it would not be an exaggeration to say you may be our last hope." His gaze swept over her kit with visible skepticism. "Your species, methods, are known to be effective in certain basic procedures. But the Crimson Veil is an enemy beyond our control." Lena nodded, stepping closer to the cryopod. The other council members took a wary step back as she approached the child. "The Veil's a brutal disease," she said, voice softening. "I've seen it in a few other species in the outer sectors, none of them Calyxians," though she crouched beside the pod, her fingers brushing over the glass, her gaze focused. The child's skin was almost transparent, his veins a dark lattice of decay. His breath came in faint, shallow puffs. Dor VA frowned, clearly not thrilled to have a human touching the pod. "I doubt you've seen anything like this strain." "Maybe not this exact strain," she said, unperturbed. "But I know its shape. I can guess at the symptoms." The council members murmured, visibly uncomfortable. One of them, a younger healer named Alien, looked at her with wide, distrustful eyes. "And you really believe you can cure him?" Lena glanced up at them, her gaze steady. "I believe I can try." With a nod, Lena opened her kit and began removing an assortment of instruments and vials. The Eryth Council members exchanged uneasy glances as she arranged a series of unfamiliar tools on the floor. They watched her with a mix of fascination and horror, clearly torn between hope and deep-seated distrust. "His organs are shutting down one by one," she murmured, studying the child's vitals displayed on a small, floating hologram beside the pod. "You've tried stabilizing his heart." "Yes," Dor VA said, sounding mildly affronted. "For days now. And the crystalline infusion." "Too harsh for his system," she interrupted. Crystalline infusions work better for regenerating tissue in adults. Children metabolize it too quickly. He's practically burnt himself out fighting it. Dorvier's mouth closed in a firm line, his disapproval clear. But Lena didn't flinch. Instead, she withdrew a vial filled with a faintly glowing green liquid. Organic antibodies, she explained, seeing the alarm in Dorvier's eyes. Human in origin, tailored for cross-species use. I've refined this serum to work in Calixian physiology. The council members visibly recoiled, some of them clutching at their chests in shock. That's unthinkable, Alien stammered, horror evident in her expression. Introducing human pathogens. Not pathogens, Lena interrupted, calm but firm. Antibodies. They're designed to work with immune systems, not against them. Incompatible? Maybe. But if I'm right, this should trigger his body's natural defenses to kickstart again. Alien stepped back, muttering to another council member in Calexian. It was clear she wasn't the only one who found the idea appalling. But Lena was already pressing forward. She carefully injected a small amount of the serum into a patch of skin on the child's arm. For a moment, nothing happened. The child's breathing remained shallow, and the heart monitor continued its slow, erratic beeping. And then, to the council's collective astonishment, the faintest flush of color returned to Kael'tar's cheeks. Dorvier's eyes widened, his stance softening in surprise. How did you? Lena didn't answer, busy monitoring the injection site. It's temporary. He'll need more. I'll have to keep adjusting the dose to avoid overwhelming his system. Dorvier watched in silence as she continued her work. The child's vitals began to stabilize, his breathing evening out. One of the council members cleared her throat. Human, she said, her tone begrudgingly respectful. Your treatment appears promising, but the crimson veil always returns. It is never truly gone. Lena met her gaze, her expression resolute. Not if we're thorough. Hours passed, Lena's careful hands administering the injections, stabilizing the boy. As she worked, the council members gathered closer, their initial disapproval turning slowly into wonder. They observed her techniques, the precise applications of pressure on specific points along the child's limbs to stimulate blood flow, the layering of additional, varied serums to reinforce the body's natural defenses. These were procedures the council had neither seen nor considered, techniques so alien to them they bordered on heretical. Finally, Dorvier broke the silence, his voice grudging but curious. Tell me, Dr. Carter, what led you to believe such a strategy would work? Lena didn't look up, her hands steady as she finished administering another injection. I grew up in a mining colony where resources were scarce. We couldn't afford the best medicine, so we had to make do with whatever we had. I learned to get creative. I learned that bodies, alien or otherwise, have a remarkable capacity to heal if given the right encouragement. One of the younger council members, Eryth, leaned closer, her expression torn between fear and admiration. Are humans always so tenacious? Lena glanced up, her eyes filled with something they couldn't quite place, a determination forged in fire and hardship. Sometimes, when we have to be. The room fell silent as Lena continued her treatment, her calm confidence an unexpected balm to the council's frayed nerves. Hours turned into days, and under her meticulous care, Kael'tar's condition slowly improved. As the child's body began to recover, the council members started to approach Lena with questions. At first, they were hesitant, almost embarrassed. But soon, their fascination overpowered their pride. Dorvier, who had initially been so hostile, began to observe her techniques more closely, asking detailed questions about each step. Your species' methods, he said one evening, as they worked side by side, are crude by our standards. Yet, there is a certain wisdom in them. Lena smirked slightly, but her gaze remained focused on the child. Crude's another word for practical, doctor. Eryth, who had been watching from a distance, ventured closer, her tone hesitant. Dr. Carter, could you teach us some of your methods? Lena looked up, taken aback. She had expected resistance, even disdain. But the earnestness in Eryth's eyes was genuine. She glanced at the other council members, who nodded, albeit reluctantly. "I can try," she said, a glint of humor in her eyes. "But I warn you, we're not always pretty about it." Over the following days, Lena taught them. She demonstrated techniques that involved touch and instinct, methods that didn't rely on the high energy, refined technology the Calixians preferred. She showed them how to monitor vitals manually, how to assess symptoms by observing skin tone, pulse, and breath skills that seemed antiquated to them, yet which proved astonishingly effective. As Lena guided them through her methods, a subtle shift took place. The council members began to mirror her determination. Even Dor VA's rigid exterior softened as he worked alongside her, his disdain tempered by admiration. By the end of the week, Kael'tar was sitting up in bed, his color restored, his eyes bright and curious as he looked around the room. Lena smiled as she checked his pulse, her heart swelling with relief and satisfaction. The council members were silent, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Dor VA stepped forward, his gaze shifting between Lena and the child. "You have accomplished what we believed impossible," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "You have healed him." Lena's smile softened as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We did it together." Dor VA hesitated, then offered her a deep, formal bow, a gesture of profound respect in Calixian culture. One by one, the other council members followed suit, their earlier distrust replaced with gratitude. Dr. Carter Rallian said, her voice barely a whisper, "You have given us a gift we can never repay." Lena inclined her head, her expression warm but humble. "Just keep learning. Keep questioning what you think you know." As she packed up her kit, preparing to leave the Grand Healer's Court, Dor VA approached her one last time. "If ever you should need our assistance," he said, his tone formal, "the Eryth Council owes you a debt that transcends species and star systems. You will always have allies here." Lena nodded, her gaze steady. "I'll remember that." As she walked out of the chamber, the council members watched her go, their expressions filled with newfound respect. The human who had come to their world as a desperate, last resort healer had left them with more than just a cure for the Crimson Veil. She had shattered their notions of superiority, leaving in her wake a legacy of humility, resilience, and the unshakable strength of the human spirit. And as Lena boarded her ship, setting a course for the stars, she couldn't help but feel a quiet triumph. They had underestimated her, dismissed her methods as crude, but she had shown them something they would never forget. Because sometimes true healing didn't come from technology or advanced medicine. It came from heart, grit, and an unyielding belief that nothing was truly incurable. As Lena's ship left the pale atmosphere of Calyx 9, she leaned back in the pilot's seat, allowing herself a deep sigh. The starlight outside blurred into long streaks, a gentle reminder of the hyperjump that would soon take her far from the alien planet, from the shimmering courts and wary stares of the Eryth Council. She wondered if they would remember her methods, or if, after the initial awe wore off, they'd shelve her lessons, relegating them to the curiosity pile reserved for peculiar human practices. A faint beep interrupted her musings, and Lena turned to see a small hologram flicker to life on her console. The familiar face of Dor VA appeared, his usually stern expression softened. "Dr. Carter," he began, his voice formal yet touched by something warmer. "I trust you are now en route to your home sector. We have not had the chance to properly thank you for your work, but I would be remiss if I did not at least convey our ongoing gratitude." Lena's smile was tinged with irony. "I'm just glad the boy's alive, Dor VA. I hope he recovers fully. Keep him on a strict diet, avoid excess activity for the next month, and monitor for any relapse." Dor VA nodded gravely, his silvery eyes glinting in the ship's light. "I have assigned one of our healers to follow your guidance in full." There was a pause, and Lena sensed a hesitation in the great healer, as if he struggled with words too foreign, too embedded in his own pride to let free. Finally, he looked at her, his gaze intense. "Dr. Carter, there is a final matter. It was brought to our attention that during your work with Kael'tar, an unusual reaction occurred, a response in the child's physiology that we do not fully understand." Lena's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" he began exhibiting an accelerated capacity for immune response, far beyond anything we've ever seen, Dor-VA said, studying her reaction. Not only did your antibodies work, they seem to have created an immune memory that could spread to others of our kind in effect we had never anticipated. Kael'tar may be inoculated against further Veil strains. The revelation settled over Lena like a quiet shock. She'd known her treatment was ambitious, an experimental shot in the dark, but that it might create an immunity that could be inherited by others was beyond her wildest expectations. So, what does that mean for your people? She asked slowly, the gravity of the situation dawning on her. Dor-VA's gaze dropped momentarily, his expression torn between pride and discomfort. The council is deliberating on it. There are those who see it as a miracle, a gift from the stars. He hesitated, his voice dropping. And there are those who view it as contamination. Lena's jaw tightened. She understood the weight of prejudice and pride better than most, and though her expression remained calm, her chest burned with frustration. Look, Dor-VA, she said, her voice steady. What happened with Kael'tar wasn't an accident, and it wasn't contamination. I used human antibodies, yes, but the healing came from the strength of his body responding. Your people created the environment for the disease to thrive by refusing other approaches. Now, you have the choice to either embrace a cure or turn your backs on it. Dor-VA absorbed her words, his expression unreadable. After a beat, he nodded. Perhaps you are right, Dr. Carter. It is difficult for some to accept that what we considered primitive could become our salvation. But I will take this matter before the council myself, as one who saw the truth. A faint smile touched Lena's lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I hope they listen to you, Dor-VA. If you ever need more help, you know where to find me. We do indeed, he said, and his voice softened. May your travels be safe, Dr. Carter. You are always welcome among us. The transmission ended, and Lena allowed herself a moment to stare into the void of space, the quiet buzz of the ship her only companion. Her work had saved a life, and perhaps, in time, it might save countless others. Whether the Eryth Council embraced the gift or hid it away, she had done what she could. She leaned back and closed her eyes, replaying memories of the council chamber, the clinical sterility, the hushed astonishment, and then, in the quiet after her treatment, the gentle breath of a child saved. When her ship's alert signaled her final approach to the nearest transit hub, Lena's thoughts shifted back to her next call, her next patient. The galaxy was vast, filled with sickness, prejudice, and pain. But if there was one thing she'd learned from Calyx 9, it was that in every sentient being, be they human or alien, there lay a core resilience, a defiance that refused to let go of life. And if she could help ignite that spark, she would do so 1,000 times over. As her ship entered orbit around the hub, Lena took a deep breath and flicked the controls to reconnect with the Rescue Corps mainframe. She was ready for whatever came next, no matter how primitive, dangerous, or unconventional her methods might appear to those who thought themselves superior. Because in the end, healing wasn't about technology or prestige. It was about hope. And so long as there was life to save, she would be there with her worn kit and her steadfast heart, ready to fight. With a final look at the stars, she whispered, "Onward."